All right, let's jump right in. When you think of ancient Egypt, your mind probably goes straight to pyramids, pharaohs, all that amazing stuff. But what was their worldview? I mean, how did they think this all began? For the ancient Egyptians, their creation myths weren't just stories. Nope, they were the actual blueprint for their entire civilization, this constant, epic struggle to pull order out of chaos. And that's exactly what we're going to get into.
You know, it's a question every single culture has grappled with. It's the ultimate mystery, right? Before the Big Bang, before any gods, before anything we can even imagine, what was there? Just a void? Total nothingness? Well, the ancient Egyptians had a really fascinating take on it.
So to really get their creation story, we have to start where they did, which is literally before the beginning. And this isn't about nothing, not at all. It's about a state of pure, messy, chaotic potential.
They called this state none, and it's so cool because it wasn't an empty void. Think of it more like a vast, dark, endless ocean, a watery, misty abyss. It had no shape, no dimensions, but it held the potential for everything that would ever exist. It was all just waiting in there. So it's less of a nothing and more of an everything all at once.
And this quote, it just nails that sense of mystery. The word that really jumps out is dimensionless, a state that's completely alien to how we experience reality. It's like this primordial soup of pure possibility, before time and space were even a thing.
So how does a world actually appear from this watery chaos? Well, here's the thing. The Egyptians didn't have just one answer. They had a few different creation stories, usually centered in their major cities. And they didn't see them as contradictions. They were just different ways of looking at the same incredible, divine event. Let's check out the two big ones.
Okay, so on one side, you've got the story from Hermopolis. This one is all about the ingredients of chaos, kind of waking up and starting the process themselves. Then on the other side, there's the story from Heliopolis. This one's more like a cosmic family tree, starting with one all-powerful creator god. So two very different approaches, but guess what? They both get to the same place, a brand new, ordered world.
The Hermopolis story is all about the Ogdoad, these 8 primordial gods. But here's the twist. They weren't gods of water or darkness. They were the water, the darkness, the endlessness, the hiddenness. They were the chaos itself, personified. And you gotta love the imagery. The male gods had frog heads, and the females had snake heads, perfect creatures for that watery, primordial world.
Now the version from Heliopolis is more like a divine soap opera. It all kicks off with one god, Atum, who basically wills himself into existence. From himself, he creates Shu, the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. They then have kids, Geb, the earth, and Nut, the sky. And boom, just like that, the physical universe is set up. Their kids, in turn, become the major players in all the divine drama to come.
But here's the thing. This is the common thread, the one piece that connects both stories, and it's absolutely crucial. It's the moment the very first piece of solid ground, a mound called the Benben, rises up out of those chaotic waters of none. This wasn't just dirt, it was a powerful symbol. It was order's very first victory over chaos, the anchor for all of creation.
Okay, so the world is here. Order has been established. But how do you keep it that way? How do you stop everything from just collapsing back into that dark, watery chaos? For the Egyptians, the answer was one single, powerful, all-important concept: Ma'at.
And this right here, this is the fundamental tug-of-war of the entire Egyptian universe. On one side, you have Isfet, that's chaos, lies, disorder, injustice, everything that threatens to tear the world apart. And on the other, you have Ma'at, the principle of order, truth, balance, and justice. And this wasn't a one-and-done battle. Oh no, it was a constant, daily fight to keep Isfet from taking over.
This quote really gets to the heart of it. Ma'at wasn't just some rule you had to follow. It was the correct, natural, proper state of everything. From the way the sun rose and set, to how a king should govern, to how you should treat your neighbor. You could almost think of it as the universe's operating system. So, how do you take this huge, abstract idea like Ma'at and make it real for people? How do you give them a daily reminder of that first moment of creation? Well, the Egyptians did something genius. They built it. They literally built their creation story out of stone.
This is where it all becomes real, and it is so cool. To the Egyptians, a temple wasn't just a building. Every single part of it was a symbol. When you walked between those massive pylon gateways, you were passing through the horizon where the sun is born. The giant columns all around you, Those were the lotus and papyrus plants that first grew on that primordial mound. The wavy walls around the temple, they were holding back the chaotic waters of Nun, and the deepest, darkest, holiest room inside, that was the Benben itself, the very spot where creation began.
So a temple was literally the universe in miniature. Every single morning, when the priest performed the rituals and opened that inner shrine, they weren't just starting their workday, they were reenacting the first sunrise. They were repeating the moment of creation, pushing back chaos and strengthening the order of Ma'at for one more day.
And this all leads us to the absolute core of the Egyptian worldview. Creation wasn't some historical event that just happened once and was over. No way. It was an ongoing project, and everybody, from the gods at the top all the way down to the average person, had a role to play in this eternal struggle to maintain order.
So whose job was it? Well, pretty much everyone's. The pharaoh's #1 job, his main responsibility, was to uphold Ma'at. The daily temple rituals, like we just saw, constantly reinforced it. Even the gods themselves were believed to live on Ma'at. It was their sustenance. And, this is key, it applied to every single person. Your entire life was basically a test of how well you lived in harmony with this cosmic principle.
And this is the final exam, the ultimate moment of truth. After you died, the Egyptians believed your heart, the center of your thoughts and actions, would be placed on one side of a scale. On the other side, a single light feather of the goddess Ma'at. If your heart was heavy with chaos, lies, and injustice, it would tip the scale, and your soul would just be gone. But if you had lived a good, balanced life, your heart would be as light as that feather. You'd be declared true of voice and be granted eternal life. What a powerful image of cosmic accountability.
And that really leaves us with something to think about, doesn't it? The Egyptians had Ma'at as their guiding light for cosmic and social order. So, what about us? In our own complicated world, what are the principles, the laws, the ethics, the shared values? What are our versions of Ma'at that we count on to keep the forces of chaos from completely taking over?
You know, every single culture has a story about how it all began. But I've got to say, few are as grand, as complex, or as deeply baked into the soul of a civilization as the creation myths of ancient Egypt. So let's just dive right in, because this isn't just some old story. It's basically the operating system for one of the most incredible empires the world has ever seen. This right here, this is a line from the pyramid texts. And get this, these are the oldest religious writings in the entire world. It takes us way back to a time before time itself. I mean, before the sky, before the earth, before anything you or I would recognize. We're not just looking at a boring list of gods here. No way. We're about to uncover the actual story that defined what it meant to live, to rule, and to die in ancient Egypt for thousands of years. Okay, so to really get a handle on the Egyptian world, we have to start where they started, and that means we're going way, way back. Before the pharaohs, before the pyramids, we're going all the way back to the absolute nothingness that came before, everything. All right, I want you to picture this, an endless, dark, totally motionless ocean. That is Nu. Now, it's not just empty space. It's more like a boundless, sleepy ocean just full of pure potential. Think of it like a cosmic soup, you know? The ingredients for everything, and I mean everything, are in there, just waiting to emerge. It's chaos, sure, but it's a chaos that's ready to create. So that brings up the big question, right? How does something come from nothing? It's the ultimate mystery. And the Egyptians, they had a really fascinating answer. For them, it wasn't some huge explosion like a big bang. Nope, it was quieter. It was like a flicker of consciousness, a single powerful will, just deciding to exist. And that consciousness? That was Atum. Now, he wasn't created by anything or anyone. He literally willed himself into being. Imagine that. He just appeared, rising out of the waters of Nu, on the very first little mound of Earth, the first solid place in the entire universe. They called him the completed one, because he was the source of absolutely everything to come. So, okay, how does one single being kickstart an entire universe? Well, the Egyptians used some pretty, let's say, earthy metaphors for this. It said that Atum sneezed and out came his son, Shu. Then he spat and out came his daughter, Tefnut. I know, it sounds a little weird, but hang on, because this is actually genius. It's a brilliant bit of wordplay. The names Shu and Tefnut sound almost exactly like the ancient Egyptian words for sneeze and spit. So they literally embedded the act of creation right into the names of their gods. How cool is that? All right, so from that first kind of strange act of creation, the universe starts to get organized. Some structure appears, and the cosmos really starts to take shape, all through Atum's kids. And listen, this isn't just some boring family tree. This is the blueprint for reality itself. So we have Shu, who is the god of air, and Tefnut, the goddess of moisture. And their very existence, that's the first major division in the universe. They create space and atmosphere right in the middle of that watery chaos of Nu. And just like that, suddenly, for the very first time, there's a here and a there. So now we've got air, we've got moisture. The stage is officially set. And the next generation of gods? They're not just some abstract ideas. Oh no. They're going to literally build the physical world as we know it, or at least as the Egyptians knew it, the earth and the sky. And this leads to one of the most incredible, iconic images in all of mythology. You've probably seen it. Shu and Tefnut have two kids, Geb, the earth god, and Nut, the sky goddess. In all the ancient art, you see Geb lying down, he is the land. And Nut is this incredible figure arching over him, her body covered in stars. She is the sky. So what's holding them apart? What's creating that space where we can all live? It's their dad Shu, the god of air. He is literally the atmosphere between the earth and the sky. It's just perfect. And from this union of earth and sky, wow, we get the forces that basically govern life itself. First, you've got Osiris. He's the god of fertility and new beginnings. Then his sister wife, the one and only Isis, the ultimate goddess of motherhood and powerful magic. Then there's Set, the wild card, the intense, unpredictable god of chaos and the desert. And finally, Nephthys, the goddess of protection. These four, they represent the whole shebang: life, death, order, and chaos. Okay, so if you've been keeping track at home, you'll know we've hit a really important number. Let's do the math real quick. We have Atum, plus his two kids, and then their 4 grandkids. That gives us a grand total of 9. And this group, these original 9 gods, they formed the absolute most important divine crew in the whole Egyptian pantheon. They're known as the Great Ennead of Heliopolis. This was it. This was the divine family tree that explained everything. The air, the moisture, the earth, the sky, the forces of life and death, everything was seen as just an extension of that original, self-created god Atum. It all comes back to him. But here's the real question. Why did this cosmic family drama matter so much? I mean, to everybody, from a regular farmer working in the fields all the way up to the pharaoh on his throne. Well, it's because this wasn't just some story about the gods. It was a promise, a really, really important one. This command, raise yourself, you shall not die, it's repeated over and over in the pyramid texts, and it shows us the real purpose of this whole myth. It was a blueprint, a how-to guide for defeating death. See, the creation story wasn't just about how the world began. It was a promise of eternal life for every person, and that promise was literally encoded into their most sacred texts. Okay, so the whole point of all those elaborate Egyptian funerals and tombs, the ultimate goal was to become an Akh. And an Akh wasn't just a ghost or some vague memory. No, it was an effective spirit. Think of it as an eternal, superpowered version of yourself, no longer stuck in a physical body, totally able to chill with the gods and the cosmos forever. But to get to that level, a super important reunion had to happen. See, the Egyptians believed you were made of a few key parts. You had your physical body, obviously. Then you had your Ka, that's your life force, like a little spark from the creator god himself. And then there's your Ba, that's kind of like our idea of a soul or your unique personality. When you died, these things all separated. So the whole point of mummification, all the spells, all the rituals, was to bring the Ba and the Ka back together, to transform you into that amazing eternal Akh. And you know what the model for this whole journey was? They saw it every single day, right above their heads, the sun. The sun god Ra would travel across the sky in his day boat. Then at night, he'd go into the underworld, the Duat, in his night boat. Down there, he'd merge with Osiris, the god of regeneration, and then, bam, he'd be reborn, totally renewed at dawn. This daily cycle of death and rebirth, that was the exact roadmap every human soul was hoping to follow. Okay, so now let's bring this all back down to Earth, because this incredible cosmic story wasn't just about spirituality and the afterlife. It was intensely political. In fact, it was the ultimate justification for the immense power of the pharaoh. So these pyramid texts, the ones carved into the tombs of pharaohs like Yunus, you can think of them as a kind of magical technology. Seriously, the Egyptians even had a word for them, sak, which literally means Ak makers, or things that make you an Ak. They were basically collections of super powerful spells designed for one purpose, to make sure the pharaoh made it through his transformation and successfully joined the gods. And here's the real kicker, where the myth becomes the law of the land. You know the story of Osiris being murdered by his chaotic brother Seth, and then his throne being reclaimed by his son Horus? That wasn't just a bedtime story. That was the divine model for who gets to be king. Every living pharaoh was seen as the embodiment of Horus, the rightful heir. And when he died, that pharaoh became Osiris, the new king of the underworld, clearing the way for the next Horus to take the throne. What this did was make the pharaoh's power absolute and totally sacred. His rule wasn't just politics, it was a cosmic necessity, something written into the fabric of creation itself. The pharaoh was the essential link between the world of the gods and the world of people. His job was to maintain order on earth, just like the god Shu held the sky and the earth apart. And that really brings us to a final thought, doesn't it? The Egyptians built their entire world on this foundational story of creation, order, and life after death. It shaped everything, their art, their politics, their whole sense of who they were for thousands of years. So it really makes you wonder, what are the foundational stories we live by today? What are the unseen myths that shape our laws, our societies, and our own understanding of the world right now? You know, for the ancient Egyptians, the daily journey of the sun god Ra wasn't just some myth. It was, and this is no exaggeration, the cosmic engine that powered their entire civilization. We're talking everything, from their politics and their religion, all the way down to the very stones of their greatest monuments. So how did one god's journey shape a whole kingdom? Let's find out. When we see a sunset like this, we think, wow, what a beautiful end to the day. But for the ancient Egyptians, no way. This was the start of an epic, dangerous, nightly battle. The second Ra dipped below the horizon, he was beginning this incredibly perilous journey through the underworld. This wasn't just a story. It was a literal fight for the survival of the universe, a fight that had to be won every single night just so the sun could rise again. Okay, so to really get a grip on ancient Egypt, you absolutely have to start with the main man himself, Ra. We need to understand just how central he was. He was the self-created king of the gods, the one who, they believed, brought order from the messy, primordial chaos right at the beginning of everything. And check this out. This quote from the pyramid texts, and we're talking about some of the oldest religious writings in the world, is just so revealing. It paints this picture of Ra, or sometimes Atum Ra, as the OG creator. The belief was that he stood on the very first little mound of earth, the Ben, that rose up out of these chaotic waters they called Nun. And right from that spot, he brought all the other gods and, yeah, pretty much all of creation into existence. Okay, so before we go any further, there's this one really important idea we have to get our heads around. It's called syncretism. Basically, the Egyptians didn't always see their gods as these totally separate individuals. A lot of the time, they would merge them, kind of mush them together, combining their powers, their names, everything, to create a bigger, more complex divine concept. And trust me, this is absolutely crucial if you want to understand Ra. And here's a perfect example of how that worked. You had Ra, right? The powerful falcon-headed god representing the blazing sun at high noon. But then he was often combined with Atum, who was this older creator god representing the setting sun. So you put them together and you get Ra Atum, a single deity who embodied the entire cycle of the sun's journey, from start to finish. Now, this whole divine connection thing, it had huge political power. Around the 5th dynasty, the pharaohs started calling themselves the Son of Ra. And this wasn't just some fancy title to sound cool. Oh no, it was a massive political statement. It cemented their divine right to rule, basically saying, hey, my family line, it goes straight back to the most powerful god in the universe. Their authority, quite literally, came straight from the sun. And, of course, a belief system this big wasn't just some abstract idea people talked about. They wrote it in stone. In fact, it inspired some of the most massive, most incredible construction projects in all of human history. I mean, just look at the Great Pyramids. They were so much more than just fancy tombs. The Egyptians saw them as giant stone versions of that primordial mound, the Ben, where creation began. They were basically cosmic launch pads, giant resurrection machines designed to shoot the pharaoh's soul up into the heavens so he could join Ra on his eternal trip across the sky. And if you think that's wild, get this. The proof wasn't just in the stone. Buried in a pit right next to the Great Pyramid, they found this, the Khufu ship. And we're not talking about a little model. This is a full-size, perfectly working boat, a solar bark. It's an absolute masterpiece of shipbuilding, just sitting there, waiting to carry the king on his cosmic voyage with Ra for all of eternity. Incredible. So where was ground zero for all this Ra worship? It was a city the Egyptians called Iunu. You probably know it by its Greek name, Heliopolis, which literally means sun city. This place was the absolute heart of the cult, a massive temple complex where, for century after century, priests carry out daily rituals to keep Ra happy and, keep the entire universe in balance. No pressure. But that raises a question. Just how far back does this all go? Archaeologists have found these really puzzling fragments, like the one you see here, from a super early king's shrine at Heliopolis. They suggest the solar cult is ancient, but the problem is their context is, it's murky. It's a historical puzzle. So because of that, our oldest, absolute, 100% undisputed proof of Ra's worship there is actually an obelisk from a bit later on. Okay, so the sun sets on the world of the living, and that's when Ra's journey takes a really dark and perilous turn. He has to descend into the Egyptian underworld, this incredibly dangerous and complex realm they called the Duat. His boat, the solar bark, now gets a new name, the Mesektet, the evening boat. And Ra himself actually transforms. To make it through the realm of the dead, he takes on the head of a ram, a form that's deeply connected to the underworld. And with that, he starts his journey through the 12 hours of the night. Now, the Duat wasn't just one single place. Think of it more like a series of 12 different regions, or hours, that he had to pass through. The journey kicks off at the horizon, then he's sailing these primordial waters, and then he enters the terrifying desert of Sokar. But the ultimate test, the big boss battle, came in the deepest, darkest part of the night, a head-on confrontation with the great serpent of chaos, Apophis. The only way to survive was to beat him, and then merge with the life-giving power of Osiris, the god of the dead. Only then could Ra be reborn and rise in the east. All right, this is it. We've reached the climax of the whole journey. We're in the deepest, darkest hours of the night, and literally the fate of the entire world is hanging in the balance. It all comes down to a cosmic battle against the ultimate force of chaos. Ra's arch-nemesis was Apophis, a monstrous, colossal serpent who was the living embodiment of chaos, darkness, and just nothingness. The idea was that every single night, Apophis would rise up from the murky waters of the underworld and attack the sunboat. His goal? To swallow the sun and send all of creation spiraling back into eternal darkness. But here's the cool part. Ra wasn't in this fight alone. Not by a long shot. A whole crew of powerful gods jumped onto the solar bark to help him out. You had Set, the god of storms, right at the front, spearing Apophis. You had Isis, weaving powerful magic to mess with the serpent's mind. Even the souls of good people who had died, the justified dead, they joined the fight too. It was a total team effort to save the universe. Phew, okay, so, with Apophis beaten back one more time, the final stage of the journey can begin. Ra has survived the nightmare of the Duat, and now he goes through this incredible transformation that guarantees life itself will continue. And just like that, the cycle is complete. After surviving the underworld, Ra is reborn as Khepri. That's the scarab beetle you see rolling the new day's sun up over the eastern horizon. Then, as the sun climbs higher, he becomes the powerful Ra we know at midday. And finally, as the sun sets, he transforms into the wise creator god Atum, ready to do the whole dangerous thing all over again. So you see, this whole nightly journey wasn't just a story. It was the very foundation of how the Egyptians saw the universe. It was that cosmic engine we talked about, the thing that maintained Ma'at. That's the divine principle of order and truth and balance. It was a constant fight against its opposite, Isfet, or chaos. Every single sunrise wasn't just a new day, it was a cosmic victory. It was a promise that life, light, and order had won, at least for one more day. So let me leave you with this thought. For the ancient Egyptians, the sunrise was never, ever something to be taken for granted. It was a daily miracle. It was a hard-won battle that proved the entire universe was still holding together. And it kind of makes you wonder, right? In our own world, which can feel pretty chaotic sometimes, maybe there's something to that idea of seeing each new day not just as a given, but as a victory.
You know, sometimes the most amazing stories come from voices we can't hear anymore. And today, we're going to try and listen to one. A story that's been locked away in a piece of stone for more than 4,000 years.
Okay, so take a look at this. It's the head of an Egyptian pharaoh. It was carved from this really tough stone called Greco-Roman, way back in the Old Kingdom. And I mean, it's just beautiful, a real survivor. You see that tall white crown? That tells us he was the ruler of Upper Egypt, the southern part of the country. But here's the catch. We have no idea who he is. His name, the rest of his statue, all lost to time.
And you might be thinking, so what, right? Without a name, he's just some king. But believe it or not, this one silent face can unlock an entire world. We're talking about belief, about power, and even about how the Egyptians thought the universe itself was created. You just have to know where to look.
So we know a few things. He was a king, ruled Upper Egypt, and this was made over 4,000 years ago. But the most crucial thing to understand is why they made it. This wasn't art for a museum, not at all. For the ancient Egyptians, this statue was a tool, an absolutely vital piece of technology designed to be a physical home for the pharaoh's spirit, forever.
And this all comes down to a really cool Egyptian idea called the Ka. You can kind of think of it as your life force or maybe a spiritual twin that sticks around after you die. But here's the thing. For the Ka to survive, it needed a physical place to live. So this statue, tucked away in a dark tomb, wasn't for people to look at. It was a functional vessel, a house for the spirit, to make sure the pharaoh could live on for eternity.
All right, so this one object points us directly to the very heart of ancient Egyptian power, the city of Memphis. Back in the Old Kingdom, Memphis was the capital. It was the center of government, art, and religion. And the religious machine that created this statue, it was way more complex than just carving houses for souls. And this is where the story takes a really fascinating turn. See, the Egyptians believed the gods could show up on Earth in very, very real ways, not just in a statue made of stone. But what if a god could walk among them as a living, breathing animal?
Well, meet the Apis bull. In Memphis, this animal was a superstar. We're not talking about just a sacred animal. This was one of the most important religious cults in all of Egyptian history. And get this, the bull wasn't a symbol of a god. They believed it was the god in the flesh.
So imagine this. Priests would fan out across the entire country looking for one very specific bull that had a set of special, sacred markings. Once they found it, that lucky bull was brought to Memphis and worshipped as the living, breathing soul of the creator god Ptah. And when that bull eventually died, it was buried with all the ceremony of a pharaoh, and then the whole search started all over again.
Okay, so let's pause for a second. You've got this whole system going on, right? You need master artists carving these essential statues, and you need priests managing a literal god on earth in the form of a bull. Who's running this whole show? Well, the answer is kind of simple, but also really weird.
No surprise, it was the priests. To be exact, it was the high priests of that creator god Ptah. But it's their official job title that is the real clue here, the thing that unlocks this whole way of thinking.
Get ready for this. Their title wasn't something like High Priest of Ptah or Chief Servant of the God. Nope. Their main formal title was Greatest of the Directors of Craftsmen. Wait, what? It sounds like a joke, right? Why on earth would the most powerful religious leader in the capital city have a job title that sounds like a construction foreman?
It turns out their job was split right down the middle. On one hand, they were priests, doing priest stuff, leading worship, managing the Apis bull cult. But on the other hand, they were basically the nation's top project managers, overseeing all the big royal art and building projects. And the most important part, these two jobs weren't separate gigs. They were two sides of the exact same coin. So that brings us right back to the big question. Why? Why combine these two roles? What's the link between worshiping a creator god and being the boss of all the artists carving statues like the one we just saw?
And here's the answer. And it's so elegant, it completely changes how you see their world. For the thinkers in Memphis, the creation of the universe wasn't some random magical event. It was a deliberate act of making something. It was the ultimate act of craftsmanship.
There's this ancient text, the Memphite theology. It spells it all out for us.
It says that Ptah, who, remember, is the patron god of craftsmen, was also the ultimate creator god. But, and this is the amazing part, he didn't create the world with his hands. He didn't use clay or stone. He created it purely with his mind and his voice.
The text literally says the world came into being through what the heart devised and the tongue commanded. Now, for the Egyptians, the heart wasn't about emotion, it was the mind, the source of ideas and intelligence. And the tongue? That was the power of speech, the act of naming something to make it real. So creation was basically an idea from a divine mind spoken into existence.
So think about it. The process is so simple but so deep. Step 1, the idea, the concept, forms in the heart or the mind. Step 2, the tongue speaks the command. And boom, Step 3, that divine word makes reality happen. Thought becomes word becomes world.
And suddenly, that weird job title makes perfect sense. The high priest is the greatest of the directors of craftsmen, because his god, Ptah, is the universe's master craftsman. Every artist chipping away at a statue, every architect designing a temple, they weren't just doing a job. They were repeating the original divine act of creation.
Now, a system like this doesn't just sit still for thousands of years. The Apis bull cult, for instance, had an unbelievably long run. It starts way back in the Old Kingdom, then gets super popular in the New Kingdom when they build these huge underground burial vaults for the bulls called the Serapeum. It got so big that even later, foreign rulers, Greeks, Persians, would get in on the cult to make themselves seem like legitimate Egyptian pharaohs.
And this led to some fascinating cultural blending. I mean, check this out. When the Greeks were in charge, they had a problem. How do you get Egyptians and Greeks to worship together? Their solution was genius. They took the Egyptian god of the dead, Apis bull, Osiris Apis, and kind of mashed him together with their own gods, like Zeus and Hades. The result? A brand new hybrid god, Serapis, that both cultures could get behind.
But even a 3,000-year-old tradition can't last forever. The big challenge came with Rome. When the Romans conquered Egypt, they just weren't that interested in funding these ancient Egyptian cults. The money dried up, the state support vanished, and by the 4th century AD, these incredible ancient traditions just faded away. The great temples were abandoned or even turned into Christian monasteries. It was truly the end of an era.
And that brings us all the way back here. Back to this silent, nameless pharaoh. He's not just some naughtiest guy in a crown anymore, is he? When you look at him now, you can see the whole story. He's a link to those powerful priests of Memphis, to a living bull god, and to this incredible idea that the entire universe was spoken into existence.
This one chunk of stone is a doorway. It's a way into how an entire civilization thought about life, death, and the cosmos itself. It just goes to show you, every single artifact, no matter how broken or anonymous, has a massive story to tell. So what other stories are just sitting out there, waiting for us to finally learn how to listen?
You ever wonder where gods actually come from? You know, we tend to think of them as these ancient, unchanging figures. But the truth is, myths and deities are always evolving. They can be born, they can merge with each other, and yeah, they can even be completely forgotten. So let's dive into this, because there is no better example of this divine evolution than the story of two powerful cow goddesses from ancient Egypt. All right, take a look at this. This is the famous Narmer palette, and it dates back to the very dawn of Egyptian civilization. Right at the top, you see the face of a cow goddess, a powerful royal symbol. Now, your first instinct, and pretty much everyone's, is to say, oh, that's Hathor. But it's not that simple. The real identity of this goddess tells this incredible story of a divine takeover. You see, before the famous Hathor ever rose to prominence, there was another, an older, sort of primordial cow goddess who, for a time, was one of the most important deities in the entire land. Her name was Bat. And what's so incredible is just how ancient Ba really was. I mean, her worship might go all the way back to the cattle-herding cultures of the Stone Age. Her look was very distinct, this combination of a human face with cow ears and horns. And she wasn't some minor deity. She was the chief goddess of her own region in Upper Egypt. She was a major player in the early days. But, you know, things change. As Egyptian society evolved, new powers and new gods began to rise. And from a neighboring region, the cult of another cow goddess started getting more and more influential, a goddess who looked, well, remarkably similar to Bat. Her name, of course, was Hathor. At first glance, they look almost identical, right? Both have that human face, the cow ears, the set of horns. But look closer, specifically at the horns. Bot's on the left curve inward. Hathor's on the right curve just slightly outward. It seems like a tiny detail, but it actually points to a very real-world reason for their designs. And this is just brilliant because it shows how mythology is tied directly to the real world. That little difference in the horns, it might just be about the different breeds of cattle that were common in each goddess's hometown, or maybe from different periods in history. It's a detail that's totally grounded in the agricultural life of ancient Egypt. So what happens when you have two very similar, very popular cow goddesses in neighboring areas? Well, in the world of ancient religion, that's just not stable. Something's got to give. One of them was pretty much destined to become dominant, not by destroying the other, but by absorbing her completely. And in the end, there was a clear winner. As Hathor's cult grew more powerful, and especially as it got sponsorship from the pharaohs, she just took over. All of Bat's jobs, her personality traits, even her look, all got folded into the identity of Hathor. That, the ancient goddess, was effectively erased, but not entirely. So where did she go? Well, her legacy actually lived on in a very specific object, the sistrum. This sacred rattle was one of Bat's main symbols, but after the merger, it became one of Hathor's most famous accessories. And often, the handle of the sistrum was carved with Bat's iconic face, a kind of ghostly reminder of the goddess who had been swallowed up. So with Bat's power now added to her own, Hathor became this super goddess. Her portfolio just exploded until she was involved in pretty much every aspect of Egyptian life and death. They weren't kidding when they called her the Great One of many names. For starters, she was the goddess of joy, music, and celebration. Her festivals were some of the most important events of the year, and they were famously wild parties filled with drinking and dancing, all meant to honor her vibrant spirit. She was also the goddess of love, romance, and all things sexy. And the Egyptians, they were not shy about this at all. They gave her titles like Lady of the Vulva that directly pointed to her power over physical attraction and love. And with that love for celebration, of course, she became the patron of the arts. What's really cool is that many of her priests and priestesses weren't just religious folks. They were actual artisans, musicians, and dancers who worshipped her by creating beautiful things in her name. Her influence went deep into the personal lives of women. She was the patron of cosmetics. You'd see her face on mirrors and makeup palettes. But more importantly, she was the divine mother. People would pray to her for help with everything from getting pregnant to surviving childbirth. But, and this is a huge but, there was another absolutely terrifying side to Hathor. She wasn't just a kind, loving mother. She could also be a ruthless agent of destruction, the vengeful eye of the sun god Ra. So how can one goddess be both? Well, there's a wild story that explains everything. The story goes that the sun god Ra got angry with humanity, so he sent his eye to punish them. She transformed into the terrifying lioness Sekhmet and went on a bloody rampage. She got so lost in her bloodlust that Ra himself couldn't call her off. To save what was left of humanity, he had to trick her. He had a field flooded with beer that was dyed red to look like blood. She drank all of it, got incredibly drunk, and passed out for 3 whole days. When she finally woke up, all her rage was gone, and she had transformed back into the benevolent, kind goddess, Hathor. That one story just perfectly captures her two-sided nature. Okay, so we've seen her personal side, but Hathor was also a huge deal for the state itself. She was seen as the divine mother of the pharaohs, which legitimized their rule. And just as important, she was believed to ensure the economic prosperity of the entire kingdom. And you can see this political power in action right here in these incredible statues known as the Menkori triads. Notice there are 2 types. In type 1, King Menkori is the star, standing in the center. But in type 2, it's Hathor who's seated on the throne, with the king standing beside her. This isn't just art, it's a powerful statement about economics and ritual. Now, to really get what's going on here, you need to know one key Egyptian word, hut. A hut was basically an estate, a foundation that controlled land and workers. Think of it as an economic engine, a center for storing and providing resources for the crown. So when you put all of that together, what do you get? Well, these statues aren't just religious art. They're practically 3D spreadsheets showing a cosmic supply chain. The theory is that they represent provisions coming from Hathor's temple estates, her huts, to supply the king's most important festival, the Hebsed, which was meant to rejuvenate his power. Hathor is literally feeding the king and his kingdom. Okay, so goddess of love, goddess of destruction, goddess of parties, and goddess of royal economics. If your head is spinning a little bit right now, that's totally okay. Honestly, that's a perfectly normal reaction when you dive into Egyptian mythology. This quote just hits the nail on the head. The ancient Egyptians had a really fluid idea of their gods. Deities could be combined, their jobs could overlap, and they could have multiple totally contradictory sides. It didn't seem to bother them, so it's a puzzle we just have to embrace. And this whole cycle, it didn't even stop with Hathor. Right, so just like Hathor had swallowed up the ancient goddess Bat, her own position would eventually be challenged. In the later periods of Egyptian history, the goddess Isis became more and more popular, and she started taking on many of Hathor's attributes, even adopting her signature cow horn and sun disk headdress. The process of divine absorption just kept on going. Which really brings us back to that first question. The story of Bat and Hathor shows us that even the most powerful gods aren't necessarily immortal. They're a reflection of a culture, its values, its politics, even its cattle. So if gods can be forgotten, merged, and replaced, what does that tell us about the stories and beliefs we hold to be so timeless today?
All right, today we're cracking open what might be the ultimate instruction manual, how to live forever, according to the ancient Egyptians. You know, for the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't the end, not at all. It was the start of an incredibly dangerous journey. And eternity, that wasn't some kind of guarantee. It was a prize you had to win. So the question on everyone's mind, from the pharaoh on down, was, what do I have to do to make it? Okay, so before we can even get to the afterlife, you've got to understand the one core belief that shaped their entire world, this constant cosmic struggle between order and chaos. And you can see this duality in how they viewed their own world, literally. For them, life was the black land, the Kemet, this thin, fertile strip of soil that came from the predictable floods of the Nile. That was order. Everything else, that was the red land, the Deshret, the endless, lifeless, dangerous desert. That was chaos. And every single day was a battle to keep that chaos from swallowing up the order. So what held all this together? What kept the chaos at bay? It was this concept called Ma'at. It wasn't just a goddess, it was the fundamental order of the entire universe. And death? Well, death was the ultimate act of chaos, the biggest possible threat to Ma'at for any one person. So if you wanted to live forever, first you had to defeat chaos. So how do you start this epic fight against chaos? Well, the very first step was practical. You had to secure a home base right here on Earth. Before your soul could go anywhere, your body had to be made permanent. See, this is absolutely key. To them, your body wasn't just some temporary shell you'd get rid of. It was an anchor. It was the eternal house that your spirit needed to be able to find its way back to. If the body decayed, your soul was basically homeless. And that whole journey to the afterlife, it was over before it even started. And that belief, right there, is why we have one of the most famous practices in all of history, mummification. This wasn't just some quick funeral rite. It was a sacred 70-day-long scientific process to cheat decay. The whole point was to make a fragile, mortal body as permanent as stone, ready to last for millions of years. I mean, the level of detail here is just wow. Most of the internal organs had to be removed to stop decomposition, but you couldn't just throw them away. No way. They were preserved separately in these things called canopic jars, each one with its own divine guardian. The only organ left inside the body? The heart. And trust me, there's a very good reason for that, which we'll get to in a minute. And then for the final touch on the body itself, the mask. This wasn't just some beautiful piece of art. Think of it as a spiritual name tag. It was an idealized, perfect version of your face, so that your life force, your Ka, could always without a doubt recognize its home and reunite with it. All right, so the body is perfectly preserved, it's anchored in the living world. Now and only now could the spiritual part of you begin its treacherous voyage through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld. Now, the Egyptian idea of a soul was really complex. It wasn't just one thing. It was made of different parts. You had the Ka, which was your life force, kind of like a spiritual twin. And you had the Ba,
which was your unique personality. The whole goal of this journey was to reunite them, and in doing so, become an Akh, a glorious, immortal spirit.
But here's the thing. The underworld was not a friendly place. We're talking terrifying demons, gates guarded by monsters, all sorts of traps. So you needed a guide. Not a Bible telling you what to believe, but a practical guidebook. Basically, a book of divine cheat codes. The Book of the Dead. It was packed with the exact spells you needed to say to get past any obstacle. So, you've used your spells, you've dodged the demons, and you finally arrive at the final exam, the ultimate moment of judgment in the Hall of Double Truth, where you have to stand before a jury of 42 gods with the king of the underworld, Osiris, presiding over it all. The first part of this test is, believe it or not, a verbal exam. You have to stand before these 42 divine judges and state your case by declaring all the bad things you haven't done. It's called the negative confession, a powerful declaration that you lived your life according to Mot. And this is why they left the heart in the body. Remember that? It was seen as the record of your entire life, all your deeds, good and bad. It was placed on one side of a huge scale, and on the other side, the single feather of Ma'at, representing truth. If your heart was heavy with sin, the monster Emmet was waiting to devour it, and poof, your existence was over. But if it was as light as the feather, you passed. You had earned eternity. Now, you weren't completely on your own during this whole ordeal. A few key gods were there to play crucial roles, guiding and judging you along the way. First and most important, you have Osiris. He's the legendary king who was actually the first mummy. After he was resurrected, he became the ultimate ruler and judge of the underworld. Your guide on the journey was the jackal-headed Anubis, the god of mummification who knew all the secret paths. And watching over the whole process was Nephthys, the goddess of death and mourning, a powerful protector of everyone who died. Okay, judgment is past. The eternal spirit, the Akh, is now free. But it still needs its permanent home, the body, to be protected for literally all of time.
The first layer of defense was the sarcophagus. But for a pharaoh, we're not talking just one box. Oh no, it was this series of masterfully crafted coffins nested one inside the other, just like a set of divine Russian dolls, each layer adding more magical and physical protection. And the last piece of this whole grand puzzle was the tomb itself. This wasn't some sad, dark grave. You have to think of it as a house of eternity. The walls were covered in powerful spells, creating what was basically a cosmic engine designed to forever power and protect the soul on its eternal journey. The sheer scale of all this effort that lasted for millennia, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around. I mean, just look at this number. Over 6.6 million ancient Egyptian artifacts are held in just the top 15 museums outside of Egypt. And that is just a tiny fraction of what they created, all to make sure that life would never ever end. You know, when you look at all this, it's easy to think this was a culture obsessed with death. But it's really the exact opposite. This was a culture so deeply, profoundly in love with life, with its order, its beauty, all of it, that they would use every single resource they had to make it last forever. They weren't building for death, they were building for eternity. Which kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it?
Today we're digging into one of the most famous and maybe most misunderstood documents from the ancient world, the Egyptian Book of the Dead. But here's the thing, this isn't just about weird spells and animal-headed gods. It's really the story of a revolution, of how the afterlife went from being a super exclusive club for just one person, the king, to something every single Egyptian could hope to achieve. So let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start with a scene you've probably seen before. This is the weighing of the heart. It is the iconic image of the Egyptian afterlife, right? It's that final, terrifying moment of judgment, where your soul is literally put on a scale to see if you're worthy of eternity.
But here's the crazy part. For centuries, this whole idea, this personal journey, this individual judgment, was completely off the table. The afterlife was a VIP section with a guest list of exactly one, the pharaoh. So what on earth happened? How did the doors to forever get thrown open for everybody else?
Well, the story starts way back, in a time when eternal life was the pharaoh's private and very secret affair.
You see, the Book of the Dead didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was the final chapter in a long story, a 1,000-year evolution of magical texts. It all began with the pyramid texts, which then evolved into the coffin texts, and finally became the Book of the Dead that we know.
The pyramid texts are literally the oldest religious writings we have anywhere in the world, and they were top secret. These spells were carved deep inside the royal pyramids for the pharaoh's eyes only. And their goal was totally different. It wasn't about an underworld. It was all about blasting the king's soul up into the heavens to join the sun god Ra on his eternal journey across the sky.
And that is the absolute key. If you were a regular person back in the Old Kingdom, you had no guide, no map to what came next. Eternal life among the stars, that was strictly for the divine king. For you, the hereafter was, well, a pretty big question mark.
But things change. The kingdom went through this chaotic period. The old ways started to fall apart, and in that chaos, brand new ideas about who deserved an afterlife began to take root. The door started to creak open, at least for the wealthy.
So, in the Middle Kingdom, we see this massive shift. The new magic spells, now called the coffin texts, weren't just for kings anymore. But the destination changed too. The focus wasn't on a sky journey with Ra anymore. Now it was about a journey underground, into a realm ruled by a completely different god, Osiris.
And these new spells were painted right on the inside of coffins for rich governors and high officials. This is what Egyptologists call the democratization of the afterlife, which is a fancy way of saying that immortality was now for sale. If you had the cash, you could get the cheat codes. So why the change? Why this sudden focus on the underworld and this new god, Osiris? Well, it all goes back to one of Egypt's most important and dramatic myths. You've got the good king, Osiris, who gets brutally murdered and chopped to pieces by his jealous brother Seth. His wife, the powerful magician Isis, tracks down every piece and puts him back together. She brings him back to life, but he can't stay in our world. Instead, he descends to become the king of the Duat, the underworld. He becomes the ultimate symbol of death and resurrection.
So the coffin texts open the door a little bit for the elites. But the final stage of this whole process, well, that was going to blow the door right off its hinges.
And that brings us to the Book of the Dead. First thing you need to know, it wasn't a book like a Bible. Think of it more like a customizable travel guide to the great beyond. It was a collection of spells written on papyrus scrolls, and you could pick and choose the ones you thought you'd need, or could afford, to get you through the dangers of the underworld.
And this whole journey leads us right back to where we began. The final exam, the weighing of the heart. Your heart, which the Egyptians believed held your conscience, was placed on one side of a scale. On the other side, a single feather, representing Ma'at, truth, justice, and cosmic order. If your heart was light, free of sin, you were in. But if it was heavy, weighed down by your misdeeds, it was fed to the terrifying monster Ennead, the devourer, and you were gone, forever.
And this, right here, was the real revolution. For the very first time, getting into the afterlife wasn't about your bloodline or how much money you had. It was about your character. It was about whether you had lived a good and decent life.
Now, it's easy to look at the Osiris story and think, okay, simple. Osiris is the good guy, Seth is the bad guy. But like most things, it's way more complicated and, frankly, more interesting than that.
Oh yeah, in that one story, Seth is absolutely the villain, no question. But for most of Egypt's long history, he was also a major, respected god. He was the god of the desert, of storms, of chaos, a raw, powerful, and necessary force. He was even the guy who stood at the front of Ra's sunboat every night and fought off the giant chaos serpent, Apophis. He was a protector.
So how did they deal with this? Well, check this out. There was a pharaoh named Seti I, which literally means man of Set. Now, on most of his monuments, his name is written with the symbol of the god Set. But in his own temple at Abydos, the main cult center of Osiris, he had his scribes do something incredibly clever. They replaced the Set symbol in his name with a symbol of Osiris instead, so as not to offend the god in his own house.
And that little detail just says it all, doesn't it? It shows us that for the Egyptians, a god wasn't just good or evil. It was all about context. Set's role as the pure, uncomplicated bad guy only really took hold very, very late in Egyptian history, once the Osiris story became the dominant belief for everyone.
So the evolution from a king's private text to a guidebook for everyone is an incredible story on its own. But the power of this myth didn't stop in ancient times. It's still making waves today, in some pretty unexpected ways.
You know, the story of Osiris and the journey through the underworld is just so full of symbolism, so deep, that it practically begs people to look for hidden meanings. And that has led to some pretty wild modern theories. Take a look at this.
On the left, a page from the Book of the Dead. On the right, a geometric pattern known as the Flower of Life, which was found carved into the Temple of Osiris. Now, mainstream Egyptologists will tell you there's no connection here. But for some modern theorists, this is where a rabbit hole begins.
There's one fringe theory, for example, that makes a pretty shocking claim, that the Book of the Dead has nothing to do with souls or magic. Instead, it argues the whole Osiris myth is actually a complex metaphor for nuclear physics and the life cycle of atoms. It says the underworld is really a scientific concept called the substratum, and that these geometric patterns prove the Egyptians had some kind of lost, advanced knowledge of mathematics and the universe.
Now look, whether you think that's a brilliant insight or just total pseudoscience, it proves one thing for sure. The Egyptians created a story so powerful, so layered, that thousands of years later, we are still arguing about it, still trying to crack its code.
And maybe that's the real legacy of the Book of the Dead. It started as a king's secret, became a moral guide for an entire civilization, and now it continues to evolve. It leaves you wondering, are we looking at an ancient map to the afterlife? Or some kind of hidden blueprint of the universe itself?
She had so many names, the great of magic, a cosmic goddess of everything. But she was also the goddess of the people, the perfect wife, the perfect sister, the perfect mother. We're going to trace the story of Isis and figure out how she made this incredible journey from a local Egyptian deity to, well, the supreme goddess of the ancient world. So the big question is, how did she pull it off? How does one single goddess capture the hearts and minds of millions, from the banks of the Nile all the way to the edges of the Roman Empire? That's what we're about to find out. So let's dive in. Okay, to really get a handle on Isis, you have to appreciate how complex she was. Just look at these titles. She's the Great Mourner, right? But she's also the Avenger of Wrongs, a huge cosmic goddess, but at the same time, she's the deeply personal goddess of the people. This knack for being everything to everyone, that was her secret weapon. But you know, her climb to the top didn't start with compassion. Oh no, it started with some serious cunning and a whole lot of ambition. It's an amazing story about how she outsmarted the king of the gods himself. And it all really begins with her name. In ancient Egyptian, a Set, which means throne. And that's not by accident. She was literally seen as the seat of power, the divine mother of every pharaoh, the one who gave him the cosmic authority to rule. And this ambition, it's on full display in one of my favorite myths. So Isis sees the great sun god Ra getting old and a little careless. She secretly collects some of his saliva, mixes it with dirt, and crafts a venomous snake, a creature that even Ra couldn't command. When the snake bites him, the pain is unlike anything he's ever felt. None of the gods can cure him. Then, Isis strolls in. She offers to heal him, but there's a price. He has to tell her his secret, true name, the very source of all his power. He fights it, but the pain is too much. He gives in. And just like that, Isis learns the name and becomes the Lady of Magic, holding power over all of creation. So her cleverness got her power, for sure. But it was a terrible tragedy, a story of love, betrayal, and just profound loss that would win her a place in people's hearts forever. And this is where we get to the most famous story about her, the myth of Osiris. I want you to picture this perfect royal couple, Isis and her husband Osiris, ruling over a golden age. They were so in love it was said they embraced even in the womb. But their brother, Seth, was just eaten up by jealousy, and he hatched a plan to tear it all down. This one story is everything. I mean, think of it like a 4-act epic. It kicks off with a shocking betrayal, which leads to a desperate, heartbreaking search. It hits its climax with a miraculous act of magic, and the finale is a legendary battle for justice that will decide the fate of Egypt itself. So when Set manages to trap Osiris in a chest and hurl him into the Nile, Isis is just shattered. Her grief is instant and so raw. She cuts off her hair, throws on mourning clothes, and starts this frantic search, wandering all over just looking for the husband she adores. But here's the thing about Isis. She doesn't just mourn, she acts. That grief becomes fuel for this incredible determination that pushes her magic to its absolute breaking point.
Her search eventually takes her all the way to Phoenicia, and there she finds that the chest holding Osiris has been absorbed by a tree, which was then used to make a pillar in the royal palace. So what does she do? She uses her wits, of course. She gets a job as a nursemaid to the queen's own child, just so she can get close to that pillar and finally get her husband's body back. But just when you think the nightmare is over, Set finds the body. And in this horrifying fit of rage, he hacks Osiris into 14 pieces and scatters them all across the land of Egypt. And still, Isis does not give up. Her agonizing search has to start all over again. And listen to this. This comes from actual ancient texts they would recite at funerals. It captures that raw personal pain of her search. You can just feel the deep love and the desperation in these words. It's a lament that every single Egyptian would have known and felt in their bones. So with the help of her sister Nephthys, Isis finds every single piece of Osiris's body. And this right here is a huge deal, because her mythical act of devotion becomes the divine blueprint for mummification. She literally creates the ritual that promised every Egyptian after her a shot at eternal life. But making Osiris whole again? That was only step one. The next part was about securing his legacy, about fixing the broken kingdom. And that meant she needed to create an heir. In an incredible display of her power, Isis uses her magic to briefly bring Osiris back to life, just long enough to conceive their son, Horus. After that, she becomes the ultimate protective mother. She hides her baby boy deep in the papyrus marshes, constantly on the lookout, shielding him from his murderous uncle, Set. And here they are, all together, the divine family. You've got Osiris, now the king of the underworld, Horus, the rightful heir to the throne of the living, and Isis, the powerful mother, literally holding the entire thing together. They became the ultimate symbol of order, winning out over chaos. So when the adult Horus finally challenges Set for the throne, the gods decide to hold a trial. And once again, it's Isis's brains that win the day. She magically disguises herself as a beautiful woman and goes to Set with a sob story about a stranger who stole her son's inheritance. Set gets all outraged and declares that a son's birthright must be protected, and with his own words, he condemns himself. Isis reveals the trick, and Horus's claim to the throne is finally secure. I mean, a story this powerful about a devoted wife, a fierce mother, and a master of magic? There was no way a story like that was going to stay just in Egypt. It was destined to go global. So how did her popularity explode? Well, part of her secret sauce was that she was great at merging with other deities. Take Hathor, for example, a really ancient, important goddess of joy and motherhood. Over time, Isis just sort of absorbed her. She took on Hathor's jobs, her stories, and even her famous look, that horned sun disk. This kind of blending made Isis even bigger and more relatable to even more people. And you can literally see this adaptability in her art. On one side, you have the classic Egyptian Isis, and on the other, a version from the Greco-Roman world. The style, the hair, the clothes, they all changed to fit the new culture. But that core identity of a powerful maternal goddess, that always stays the same. But really, at the end of the day, what made her go global was this. Her story was just so incredibly human. Anyone, anywhere, could understand the pain of losing someone you love, that fierce drive to protect your child, and the will to fight back when you've been wronged. She wasn't some distant, untouchable god. You felt like you knew her. And this, I think, really puts her legacy into perspective. When foreign empires like Greece and Rome conquered Egypt, the cults of almost all the other great gods just faded away. But not Isis. Her cult didn't just survive, it thrived. She was just too powerful, too personal, and too adaptable to be erased. Which kind of leaves us with one last thought to chew on. For thousands of years, people were drawn to this story of a goddess who could command the universe, but who also knew what it was like to feel deep human sorrow. What does her incredible, lasting success tell us about what we're all really looking for in our gods?
You know, when we think of ancient Egypt, we usually picture these giant pyramids or maybe golden masks, right? But forget all that for a second. 3,000 years ago, one of the most powerful things you could possibly own was small enough to fit right in the palm of your hand. It's the main clue in a real-life archaeological detective story, and it's called the Wedget Eye. Now, this little amulet, it's made of a ceramic material called faience. To us, it might just look like a museum piece. But for an ancient Egyptian,
Oh, this was powerful magic. It was like a shield for the living and a key to the afterlife. It's our oculus, our eye into their entire world.
See, this isn't just a story about some old object. It's about a whole civilization that was going through this period of profound change. So you have to ask, what secrets can a single 3,000-year-old charm really tell us about a society that was completely redefining itself? To answer that, we first got to understand the time and place this amulet came from. And it's a period in Egyptian history that honestly presents a pretty unique challenge for historians. Our story is set right in the middle of Egypt's Middle Kingdom. It's this absolutely fascinating era, kind of sandwiched between the famous pyramid-building Old Kingdom and the imperial New Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom was a time of cultural rebirth and some really big social changes, all coming after a century of total political collapse. But here's the catch. The folks in the Middle Kingdom, they didn't leave behind a ton of grand histories or official records. So to figure this era out, we can't just read about it. We have to become detectives, piecing the story together from the only clues they left, the actual objects they buried in their tombs. And that brings us right back to our central clue, the Wedjat eye. To really get why this little amulet was so important to the people of the Middle Kingdom, we first have to understand the powerful myth behind it. So, at the very heart of Egyptian belief is this classic story of family, betrayal, and revenge. It's called the Osiris myth. You've got the good king Osiris, who gets murdered by his jealous brother Seth. Then his wife, the powerful magician Isis, brings him back to life, just long enough to have a son, an heir, named Horus, who would one day grow up to avenge his father. During their epic struggle for the throne, Seth rips out Horus's left eye and shatters it into pieces. But through some divine magic, the eye is made whole again, and in that one moment, a symbol of violent injury is totally transformed into this incredibly powerful symbol of healing. And this is the Wedjat eye. The name itself literally means the sound one or the whole one. It became one of the most powerful symbols in all of ancient Egypt. It didn't just stand for physical healing, it represented the restoration of divine order, protection from evil, and the ultimate triumph of right over wrong. Now, to really understand this, you have to kind of get your head around how Egyptians saw the world. For them, an image wasn't just a picture. It held real, tangible power. A hieroglyph could be an act of magic. So this amulet wasn't just a piece of jewelry. It was an active force field, protecting you in this life and the next. So, we have this unbelievably potent symbol. But its story in the Middle Kingdom is about way more than just mythology. It's about a revolution in who could get access to that kind of power. Okay, so here we see this massive shift. In the Old Kingdom, a guaranteed godlike afterlife was basically reserved for the pharaoh, period. But in the Middle Kingdom, that all changed. That path to divinity opened up. All of a sudden, a rising middle class could hope for the very same eternal destiny as kings. It's a huge deal. And we can literally see the proof of this buried in the ground. At the Abydos North Cemetery, which was the sacred city of the god Osiris, this became the place to be buried. Archaeologists found tombs for people from all different social standings, not just royalty, all built right next to each other. And in fact, when archaeologists actually analyzed these tombs, they found something remarkable. The most common tombs didn't belong to the super rich or the very poor. They belonged to this emerging middle group. They totally dominated the cemetery. This is the physical evidence of that new social reality. So you have to wonder, how did a symbol that used to be for royalty end up in the hands of so many regular people? Well, the answer is technology. These amulets were made of faience, which is crafted from cheap stuff like sand. And crucially, artisans started using molds. This let them mass produce these powerful charms quickly and affordably for a whole new market. So the Wedjat eye became this personal key to the afterlife for a lot of people. But what's absolutely fascinating is that this very same symbol was also tied to the highest level of power in the state, the divine authority of the pharaoh himself. So our next clue comes from a magical text from the time called Coffin Text, spell 148. In it, the goddess Isis asks for a place for her newborn son, Horus, among the other gods. But for decades, a key phrase in the spell was a complete and total puzzle for Egyptologists. Yeah, the problem was, what exactly is Horus joining? For years, the translations were all over the place. One scholar thought it was a mysterious figure called the Releaser,
Another proposed the unfurler. And then a new interpretation by Stephen Gregory argued it wasn't a person at all, but something else entirely. The bark of authority.
And the answer was hiding in plain sight, right there in the tiny details of the hieroglyphs. It all came down to just re-examining the original script. What scholars had been reading for years as the signs for releaser or unfurler was actually a slightly different combination of signs, one that meant bark of authority. A tiny little change with a massive meaning.
So why does this one phrase matter so much? Because the bark of authority isn't just some boat. It's the cosmic ship of the sun god. So placing Horus on that ship confirms his divine right to rule, and by extension, the pharaohs. It's the ultimate link between the king and the power that literally runs the universe. Okay, so let's bring all these different threads together now. We started with one small amulet, and we've ended up right at the very heart of Egyptian cosmology and the idea of kingship itself. The wedget eye wasn't just one thing. It was a personal amulet for protection. It was also the symbol of a social movement, this democratization of the afterlife. And at the highest level, it was a symbol that connected the myth of Horus's restored eye to the pharaoh's authority over the entire cosmic order. All of that meaning is packed into this one tiny object.
It's just such a powerful reminder that objects are never just objects. They're packed with myths, social hopes, and huge ideas. Which really leaves just one final question. What simple symbols from our world carry that much weight? What single image would tell an archaeologist 3,000 years from now the entire story of us?
You know, in the huge pantheon of ancient Egyptian gods, there's one guy who just stands out as a massive contradiction. I mean, he's a celebrated hero and a hated murderer, a divine protector and a backstabbing usurper. This is the incredible paradox of the god Seth. So let's just get right into it, because this is the big question, right? How did the ancient Egyptians wrap their heads around a god who was the bad guy in their most sacred story, but also the hero in another myth that was just as important? The answer shows us a worldview that's way more interesting than just simple good versus evil.
All right, to really get Seth, we've got to understand the world that made him. So we're jumping back about 4,000 years to Egypt's Middle Kingdom. This was a time of amazing prosperity and really a kind of cultural rebirth.
Now, the Middle Kingdom didn't just pop up out of the blue. It actually rose from the ashes of what's called the First Intermediate Period. We're talking a full century of civil war and total chaos. So when Pharaoh Mentuhotep II finally pulled the country back together around 2055 BC, he kicked off a brand new golden age of stability, art, and amazing literature.
And with all this new stability, something huge shifted in their religion. The cult of Osiris, the god of the afterlife, just exploded. It became incredibly popular. All of a sudden, it wasn't just the pharaoh who was thinking about the afterlife. Everyone wanted a piece of that resurrection action with Osiris. And this massive cultural shift, well, it sets the stage for Seth's most famous or infamous role.
Okay, so let's get to the story. The one that made Seth a household name, and not in a good way. This is the myth that really cemented him in people's minds as Egypt's #1 villain. See, Osiris wasn't just some random god. He was the perfect king. He was order, life, the rich, fertile black soil of the Nile that basically fed everybody. His rule was a paradise, which makes what his brother did next just an unthinkable crime against the entire universe.
What's so chilling about this is how cold and calculated it is. Seth is eaten up with jealousy, but he doesn't just, fly off the handle. He plots. He builds this gorgeous chest, turns it into a party game, and tricks his own brother into climbing into what is basically his own coffin. It's the ultimate betrayal, and it ends with Osiris sealed up and tossed into the Nile.
But it gets so much worse. After Osiris's wife, the goddess Isis, manages to find his body, Seth gets to it first, and this is where he really becomes the monster of the story. He doesn't just kill his brother, he desecrates the body. He hacks it into pieces and scatters them all over Egypt, specifically to stop him from ever being resurrected. It's the ultimate act of chaos, destroying order.
So, Seth is the original murderer, a symbol of pure jealousy and chaos. Case closed, right? He's the bad guy. Well, not even close, because now we need to meet the other Seth, the hero the gods literally couldn't live without.
And here it is, the paradox in a nutshell. How can the guy who murdered the king of the gods also be the #1 protector of the creator of the gods? I mean, these two roles feel like they're from different universes, but for the Egyptians, they were both totally true, for the exact same god.
To get why Seth was a hero, you have to picture this cosmic battle happening every single day. Every night, the sun god Ra sails his boat through the dark, dangerous underworld, and every night he's attacked by Apep, this gigantic serpent who is literally the embodiment of world-ending chaos. If Apep ever won, the sun wouldn't rise. Creation would just end.
So who's standing at the front of that boat, defending all of creation? Seth. The stories say that Apep's stare could paralyze any other god who looked at it. But Seth, the god of chaos himself, was immune. He was the only one with the raw strength and ferocity to spear that serpent, night after night, making sure the sun rose again. He wasn't just a hero, he was the necessary hero.
So, murderer and savior, all wrapped up in one god? How on earth did the Egyptians make that work? Well, the answer isn't about judging him as good or evil. It's about understanding where he fit into their world.
The Egyptians saw their whole world as two parts of a whole. You had the Kemet, the Black Land. That's the life-giving, orderly, civilized strip of fertile soil along the Nile. And then you had the Deshret, the Red Land, the vast, chaotic, and incredibly powerful desert all around them. Seth was the god of that Red Land.
So Seth was everything the desert was. Violent storms, disorder, even the strange lands of foreigners. But these things weren't just bad. They represented raw, untamed power. Think about it. The kind of brutal strength you need to survive in the desert, or to fight an enemy, that was Seth's strength. It was dangerous, for sure, but it was also absolutely essential.
This all comes back to a core idea they called Mot, which is basically cosmic balance. For the Egyptians, order wasn't something that just existed. It was something you had to constantly fight for. And for order to be strong, it had to be tested by chaos. So Seth wasn't really the enemy of order. He was the challenge that made order stronger, its necessary opposite.
And you can see this so clearly in their art. Check this out. You'll see pharaohs being crowned by two gods at once. Horus, the god of order and kingship, and Seth, the god of chaotic strength. A real king needed both. You had to keep the peace inside your kingdom, sure, but you also had to have that raw, violent power of Seth to go out and crush Egypt's enemies.
Okay, so if Seth was this vital part of the cosmic engine, why do we pretty much only remember him as the villain today? Well, his reputation basically became a casualty of politics. That one key thing about him, being the god of foreigners, it became his undoing.
See, after the Middle Kingdom fell apart, Egypt got divided again. And this time, a group of foreign rulers from the Near East, a people we call the Hyksos, came in and took control of northern Egypt.
And guess which Egyptian god these foreign kings decided to make their own? You got it, Seth. I mean, it made sense to them. He was a storm god, the traditional god of foreigners. He was a perfect fit for their own main god, Baal. So for the Hyksos, worshipping Seth was a power move, but for the Egyptians, it was a total insult.
So when the Egyptians finally kicked the Hyksos out, this huge wave of nationalism and fear of foreigners swept the country. All of a sudden, Seth's connection to foreigners wasn't a cool symbol of worldly power anymore. It was the ugly stain of foreign oppression. The god of their enemy became the enemy god.
And from there, it was a systematic takedown. Scribes and priests started really playing up the murder of Osiris, while kinda forgetting to mention his heroic role defending Ra. His name and his face were literally chiseled off of temple walls. It was a deliberate campaign to erase the good parts and lock him into the role of the villain forever.
Seth's journey, from being this necessary, chaotic force of nature to a despised demon, it just shows you how powerfully politics can reshape a story, even a sacred one. And it leaves us with a question that goes way beyond ancient Egypt. Are the figures we see as absolute evil really born that way? Or are they shaped into villains by the fears and the politics of their time?
In the grand story of ancient Egypt, this incredible 3,000-year history of gods and pharaohs, there's one chapter that was deliberately ripped out, just erased. This is the story of the pharaoh who didn't just challenge the gods, he declared war on them. I mean, really think about that. What if a leader, right at the peak of their empire's power, just decided to throw out thousands of years of religion, to tell people, forget all those gods you know. There's only one now. It sounds like something from modern times, but this actually happened more than 3,300 years ago. And the man who did it, his name was Akhenaten. To some, he was a visionary. to others, a radical heretic. And for his trouble, his own successors tried to wipe him from existence, smashing his statues, tearing down his temples, and striking his name from every single list of kings. It's an incredible story, and to get why he inspired both total devotion and that kind of pure hatred, we have to start with the world he was born into.
So, to really understand just how massive Akhenaten's rebellion was, you gotta understand what he was going up against. Egypt back then wasn't just ruled by the pharaoh. Oh no, it was dominated by this incredibly powerful religious establishment, all centered around the king of the gods, Amun.
Get this number in your head, 900 square miles. That's how much land the priesthood of Amun controlled, and that's not even counting all their quarries and mines. They were fantastically wealthy. They weren't just a church, they were basically a state within the state. And the heart of their power was the Temple of Karnak. Calling it a temple really doesn't do it justice. It was a city, a massive, sprawling complex for worship. To give you an idea of its scale, thousands of years later, when Napoleon's soldiers, these battle-hardened guys, first laid eyes on the ruins, they were so blown away they just snapped to attention. No one even gave an order. That's the kind of power we're talking about.
See, the priests of Amun weren't just guys in robes. They were CEOs of a massive economic empire. They owned 2/3 of all the temple lands in Egypt and 90% of the country's ships. Their political influence was so huge, it could actually challenge the pharaoh himself. And this was the institution that a brand new young king was about to take on. So, onto the scene comes this new pharaoh. At first, everyone knew him as Amenhotep IV. But he wasn't going to keep that name for long. He was about to kick off a revolution that would shake the entire country to its core. And wow, did he move fast. No messing around. In his very first years, he's already making moves. By his second year on the throne, he basically says the old gods are obsolete. By year 3, he's building brand new temples to his god, the Aten, right in Amun's backyard at Karnak. And then, just 5 years into his reign, he makes his most radical moves yet. He changes his name. And you have to understand, this was a massive statement. He gets rid of Amenhotep, which means Amun is satisfied, and becomes Akhenaten, which means effective for the Aten. He was literally rewriting his own identity, publicly cutting ties with the old king of the gods and pledging himself completely to his new one. So what exactly was this new faith, Osinism? Well, it focused entirely on the Aten, the physical disk of the sun you can see in the sky. But here's the kicker. He didn't see it as just one of the gods. He said it was the one and only universal creator. This was a huge departure from the hundreds of gods Egyptians had worshipped for centuries. But just changing his name and promoting a new idea, that wasn't nearly enough for Akhenaten. Nope. He set out to build an entirely new world, a physical reality constructed from the ground up, all to reflect his new vision. This line right here, probably written by Akhenaten himself, this is the heart of it all. In a world full of gods, he declared there was only one, a single universal creator who made everything. It was an idea so radical it was almost unthinkable. For him, the Aten wasn't just for Egyptians, it was the god for everyone, everywhere. He completely abandoned Thebes, the center of Amun's power, and built a brand new capital city, literally from scratch, out in the middle of the desert. He called it Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. The whole city was designed around his new religion, with huge open-air temples so worshippers could be in the direct sunlight. And they built it at an incredible speed, using these smaller, standardized stone blocks called talatats. And the revolution didn't stop there. It completely changed Egyptian art. For centuries, art had been super rigid and idealized, you know? The pharaoh always looked perfect, godlike. Akhenaten threw all of that out. The new Amarna style was shockingly realistic, showing him with a long face, a bit of a belly, and wide hips. For the first time ever, we also see these intimate family moments in royal art. It was a whole new way of seeing the pharaoh, not as a distant god, but as a human link to the divine.
And this might have been his most audacious move of all. Akhenaten didn't just get rid of the old gods, he got rid of the entire priesthood too, and replaced them with himself. All of a sudden, the only way to connect with the divine was through the pharaoh and his family. He wasn't just a king anymore, he was the one and only prophet of his new religion.
For 17 years, Akhenaten's revolution actually worked. But here's the thing about a system built entirely around one man. It's incredibly fragile. The second he died, the old world came roaring back with a vengeance.
The backlash was just total. The establishment he'd pushed aside was so angry they refused to even say his name. In the official records, his entire reign was just blotted out. He became known only as the enemy or that criminal. His memory was meant to be completely scoured from history.
His successors started to methodically dismantle every single thing he had built. First, his own son, Tutankhamun, who was born Tutankhaten, moves the royal court right back to Thebes. The old gods are brought back, and the priests of Amun get all their power and wealth returned. Then, later pharaohs physically tear down Akhenaten's temples, using those little teletop blocks as rubble to fill their own buildings. And finally, they took that last step. They struck his name and the names of his successors from all the official lists of kings. It was as if he and his 17-year reign had never even happened.
And for over 3,000 years, the plan actually worked. Akhenaten was a ghost, a forgotten story. But, a story this dramatic, you can't keep it buried forever. Then, in the 19th century, archaeologists are digging in the desert and they stumble on the ruins of this mysterious, abandoned city, Akhetaten. And as they started uncovering its strange art and its unique temples, the story of this lost pharaoh began to come back to life, piece by painstaking piece. And ever since he was rediscovered, the debate has been raging. Who was this guy really? Was he a heretic who drove Egypt into chaos? Was he a brilliant visionary? Maybe the world's first monotheist, born thousands of years too early? Or was he just a madman, obsessed with one radical idea? And the questions just keep piling up. Thinkers like Sigmund Freud even wondered if his ideas might have influenced early Judaism. And it's true, the similarities between his great hymn to the Atum and Psalm 104 in the Bible are pretty striking. People still argue about his strange appearance and all that art. Was it a real medical condition? Or was it purely symbolic, a way to show himself as this androgynous figure, embodying a god that was both mother and father to everyone? These are the debates that make him so endlessly fascinating. In the end, Akhenaten's story makes us ask a much bigger question. He built this whole new world, a new faith, a new reality, but it was all centered on him. So what happens to a revolution that's so completely tied to one person? Well, in his case, the second he was gone, it all came crashing down, and the old way of doing things came back with a fury. His story is just this powerful, timeless lesson on what happens when a radical new vision goes head-to-head with tradition.
All right, so let's jump right in. When you hear the name of the Egyptian goddess Mut, you probably picture the classic divine family, right? You've got the great god Amun, their son Khonsu, and Mut, the wife. But that simple, cozy picture, it doesn't even come close to the real story. We're talking about an absolutely incredible goddess, full of complexity and raw power. So today, we're going to peel back those layers on one of the most misunderstood deities in the entire pantheon.
And this is usually where her story begins, and honestly, where it often ends for most people. Her name, Mut, is literally the ancient Egyptian word for mother. She's the great mother goddess of Thebes, the heart of this super powerful religious family. And yeah, she's often shown as this nurturing, protective figure, the perfect queen and mom.
But yeah, you guessed it. Is that really all there is to her? That serene image is just one tiny piece of a much, much bigger and way wilder puzzle.
Let's dig into her royal power first, because this is where you start to see the first hints that Mut was playing a totally different game. Okay, quick crash course on royal symbols. This is the double crown of Egypt. It's a mashup of the crowns of the two lands, Upper and Lower Egypt, and it symbolizes total, absolute pharaonic authority. It was a symbol worn by exactly one person, the male king, period.
So with that in mind, why in the world is Mut wearing it? I mean, just look at this. On the left, a pharaoh. On the right, Mut. Both rocking the exact same crown of absolute power. This was not a fashion choice, okay? This was a profound statement of status. No other queen, no other goddess ever wore this crown. Only Mut. And that's what this quote gets at. It reveals her true role. She wasn't just supporting the king from the sidelines. She was the institution of kingship.
She wasn't just a divine queen, she was the one who actually guaranteed the divine right to rule, passing it down to her son, the pharaoh. She literally made kings. But even that incredible power is still just scratching the surface.
Because for all her motherly and royal authority, Mut had this other side, a truly terrifying, dark side.
This is where things take a sharp turn. The benevolent mother goddess, well, she could become something else entirely, something primal, destructive, something you would not want to meet in a dark alley. And here she is. Meet Sekhmet. Now, the absolutely mind-blowing part? Sekhmet wasn't some separate rival goddess. Nope, she was Mut, just in her most dangerous form. As Sekhmet, she was the Eye of Re, the living embodiment of the sun's scorching, destructive power, a ferocious lioness sent to punish humanity.
So you've got this wild duality, right? It's like two sides of the same cosmic coin. On one side, Mut is the protector, the mother, the queen. But flip that coin and she's Sekhmet, the plague bringer, the unstoppable destroyer, the bloodthirsty lioness. These aren't two different goddesses. They're two faces of the exact same cosmic force.
Which leads to a pretty big question, doesn't it? I mean, how do you even worship a deity who can be a nurturing mother one minute and a world-ending monster the next? How do you keep that kind of destructive power in check?
Well, the answer, believe it or not, was basically to throw a giant, divinely approved party. A massive, ecstatic festival designed specifically to calm down the lioness within. It all goes back to this amazing myth. The story goes that humanity rebelled against the old sun god, Re. So he unleashed his daughter, his Eye, as the lioness Sekhmet. She just goes on a rampage, slaughtering people left and right. But her bloodlust was so intense, she couldn't stop. She was going to wipe everyone out. So to save the last few humans, Re came up with a trick. He had thousands of jars of beer dyed red. Sekhmet, thinking it was blood, drank it all, got completely drunk, passed out, and totally forgot why she was so angry. And this wasn't just some fairy tale they told their kids. It became the actual blueprint for a real annual event, the Festival of Drunkenness.
We actually have a description from the Greek historian Herodotus, and let me tell you, it sounds like an absolute rager. He said people came from all over Egypt by boat, singing, dancing, playing music. He even notes that some of the women would shout, dance, and, well, lift up their skirts. It was a time of total, joyful abandon.
But here's the crucial part. This wasn't just people partying for the sake of partying. The goal was to reach a state of ritual ecstasy, to communally reenact the myth of pacifying the lioness. By getting drunk, dancing, and celebrating, the people were taking part in a vital cosmic ritual. They were making sure the goddess's wrath was cooled off so the world could be renewed for another year.
And this whole incredible ritual, it had an equally incredible stage, a real place that you can still go and see today. This right here is the precinct of Mut at Karnak, and I want you to look closely at that lake, that unique horseshoe shape surrounding her main temple. That was not just for decoration. That specific shape has a name. It's called an Ishiru, and these lakes were built only at the temples of lioness goddesses. The Ishiru was filled with the primordial waters of the Nile flood, and mythologically, this was the exact spot where the goddess's fiery rage was quenched, transforming her from a destructive monster back into a life-giving force.
And we're not just guessing that this is where the parties happened. We've got the receipts. This is an ancient drawing from a nearby tomb, and what does it show? Festival boats sailing on that very U-shaped lake at Mut's temple. It's direct proof of the rituals we've been talking about.
And the Egyptians, they wanted to make this ritual last forever. So they did something incredible. They set up hundreds of statues of the lioness Sekhmet all over her temple. This wasn't just art, it was a litany in stone. Each and every statue was like a magical battery, ensuring the goddess was pacified day in and day out for all eternity.
So when you put it all together, you can see Mut was never just one thing, right? She was a complete spectrum of divine power. She was the protective mother, the royal kingmaker, the terrifying lioness, and even this seductive force whose wild rituals renewed all of creation.
It all comes down to this powerful cyclical idea. She starts as the destructive daughter of the sun god, his personal avenger, but through ritual, she's transformed into his lover, who then becomes the mother of the reborn sun, starting the whole cycle all over again. So you have a mother, a king, a monster, and a savior, all wrapped up in one deity. She embodied creation and destruction,
order and chaos. Far from being a simple one-note figure, Mut forces us to see these ancient gods not as characters with one job, but as complex, dynamic forces that contain all of life's contradictions. It really makes you think, doesn't it?
So you've probably heard the name Khonsu, right? Maybe from a certain comic book or TV show. You're thinking, Egyptian moon god, mysterious, powerful. But what if I told you that's just the end of the story? The real story, the original one, is much, much darker. Let's go back and uncover the god he really was.
Okay, let's just start right here. This isn't some modern comic book line. This comes from the coffin texts, actual Egyptian funerary spells from over 4,000 years ago. Let that sink in. Khonsu who lives on hearts. That doesn't sound like your friendly neighborhood moon god, does it? This one chilling line is our first clue that the original Khonsu was something else entirely.
Yeah, because when we crack open the oldest records, the god that steps out of the shadows isn't a protector. He's not a healer. In his first appearances, Khonsu was cast as something truly terrifying and brutally violent.
So how terrifying are we talking? Well, get this. The ancient pyramid texts describe how a dead pharaoh had to become all-powerful in the afterlife. And the way to do that? By literally eating other gods to steal their magic. And Khonsu's job in all of this? He was the divine butcher. His title was Khonsu who slew the lords. He was the one who helped the king hunt down, kill, and feast on other deities. Yup, cosmic cannibalism.
And that brings us to the central mystery here. How in the world does a bloodthirsty cannibal god pull off a complete rebrand and become one of Egypt's most popular healers and protectors? I mean, that's a heck of a career change. The journey from one to the other is an incredible story of religion, politics, and raw ambition.
The answer really starts to take shape in the New Kingdom, when the city of Thebes was basically the center of the universe. It was here, in the most powerful city on Earth, that Khonsu's identity got a complete makeover. And they did it by giving him something he never had before, a family.
And we're not talking about just any family. We're talking about the ultimate power family, the Theban triad. All of a sudden, Khonsu isn't this lone, scary entity anymore. Now he's the son of the biggest gods in the pantheon, Amun-Ra, the king of the gods, and Mut, the great mother. And, being the son of the divine power couple, that's going to soften your image quite a bit.
And this is where the new branding really shines. His violent past was completely scrubbed from the record. Now, his whole identity was focused on the moon. His very name, Khonsu, means the traveler. He was now the god who guides the moon across the night sky, which, you have to admit, sounds a whole lot better than divine butcher.
But here's the interesting part. This makeover didn't make him boring. Actually, it made him way more complex. Khonsu became this fascinating god of contradictions, with all these different forms and roles that hinted at his complicated past.
You can see this split personality perfectly in his art. On one hand, you get the mummified kid with the classic child's haircut. That's all about the new moon and eternal renewal. But then, you also get this powerful falcon-headed warrior, linking him to the heavy hitters like Horus and Ra. That version is all about divine authority and being a fierce protector. He was both things at once.
So in the end, the transformation was total. The cannibal god was ancient history. In his place was this go-to deity for just about everything. Healing the sick, helping with fertility, marking time, and, in a really nice twist, protecting people who traveled at night. It's a complete 180 from where he started.
And nothing shows off his new reputation like the story of the Ben Tresh Stela. It's a great one. So a foreign princess gets possessed by a nasty spirit. What does the pharaoh do? He doesn't send an army, he sends a statue of Khonsu. The legend says just the statue's presence in the room was enough to kick the demon out and cure her. This story went like ancient world viral, and it cemented Khonsu's status as a superstar healer.
But the story doesn't just end in myth. Khonsu's amazing transformation from feared monster to beloved healer served a very real, very human purpose. It became a tool for ambition, and it all centered on his incredible temple at Karnak.
So picture this. It's the end of the New Kingdom, and Egypt is a bit shaky. The pharaoh's power is weakening, and into this power vacuum steps a seriously ambitious guy named Hathor, the high priest of Amun, and he starts this massive project to build a huge, gorgeous temple. But not for his own god, Amun. He builds it for Amun's son, Khonsu. So why?
Well, because the temple itself was a brilliant piece of propaganda.
Inside, Hathor had himself carved onto the walls, doing rituals that only the pharaoh was supposed to do. Look at this scene. He's not just acting like a priest, he's visually styling himself as the king. He's using the sacred space to basically tell everyone, hey, I'm the one in charge.
And this quote just nails it. The art in Hathor's temple wasn't just recording his power, it was actively creating it. The temple wasn't a history book, it was a machine designed to make a king, to legitimize his power right in front of everyone's eyes.
And that was the masterstroke. Khonsu was this super popular, benevolent, healing god. Building him a brand new temple was the perfect cover for an ambitious priest to grab the throne. By promoting Khonsu, Hathor promoted himself. He basically rode the god's popularity all the way to a successful coup, becoming the ruler of Upper Egypt.
So it all leaves you with this one big question. The entire evolution of Khonsu, from a cannibal god to a beloved healer to a political kingmaker, it perfectly reflects the needs and ambitions of the people worshipping him. Which makes you wonder, are the stories we tell about our gods ever really just about them? Or are they always, in some way, really about us?
You know, for the ancient Egyptians, the afterlife wasn't some vague, hopeful dream. No, it was a destination, a place you could literally plan for, prepare for, and yeah, even engineer. So let's dive into what is basically a masterclass on building your own eternal future.
And this is going to be our guide for the journey. It's the coffin of a priest, a man named Jehutimos, who died way back around 600 BCE. Now, it might just look like a container, right? But to him, this thing was a piece of high-tech equipment, a personalized spacecraft designed to navigate the treacherous currents of eternity.
So that really is the question, isn't it? If your existence just stretched on forever, what would you even pack? What kind of map would you need? Well, the Egyptians, they had some very specific, very detailed answers. Look, this wasn't just some casual belief system, this was a project on a cosmic scale. For the Egyptian elite, their entire lives were basically one long preparation for death, because they saw death not as an end, but as the real beginning, the start of the most important journey of all. So the first thing you need is a map and a rulebook. Yeah, the final destination was supposed to be a paradise, but getting there meant a dangerous trip through the Duat, the underworld, which was filled with monsters and all kinds of trials. Your guidebook for this was the Book of the Dead, basically a scroll packed with all the essential spells, prayers, and even passwords you needed to survive. And to even make that journey, you had to understand what you even were, which they saw in a pretty fascinating way. It wasn't just one single soul. Nope, you had three parts. Your Ba was your personality, your essence, shown as a human-headed bird that could actually fly out of the tomb. Then you had your Ka, which was your life force, and that stayed with the body. The ultimate goal? For your Ba and Ka to reunite, creating the Ak, your perfected, immortal, shining self. Okay, so enough with the general theory, right? Let's look at a specific case. The story of our priest Jehutimos gives us this incredibly personal look at how one man went about engineering his own eternity. Now, Jehutimos wasn't a pharaoh, but he was still a pretty important guy. He was a priest of the falcon god Horus, living down in the southern city of Edfu, and he lived during this really interesting time of cultural revival in Egypt, a period where all these ancient traditions and beliefs were being sharpened, refined, and perfected. And this, right here, just perfectly shows you the connection between his life and his afterlife. On the left, you've got the grand temple at Edfu, where he served the gods every single day. And on the right, you see those very same gods painted onto his coffin, basically enlisted as his divine crew to protect him on his journey through the great unknown.
So this is the crucial thing to get. The coffin was the technology. It was a self-contained universe. Every single image, every line of text was carefully chosen and placed to provide power, protection, and a roadmap for his soul.
Let's see how it worked. The outside of the coffin, on the left, it's like a fortress. It's covered in protective gods and spells. But the inside, oh, the inside is incredible. On the right, that's the sky goddess Nut, her body stretching across the entire lid. So when the coffin was closed, she would be eternally embracing Jehutimos, acting as both his mother and the very sky through which he'd be reborn each day, just like the sun.
Okay, now we're going to zoom way in on one single fascinating detail. It might seem small, but trust me, it reveals the incredible precision and, really, the interconnectedness of the entire Egyptian cosmos. What you're looking at is a piece of a water clock. The Egyptians were absolute masters of timekeeping. And for them, measuring the hours wasn't just, for knowing when to eat lunch. It was absolutely critical for temple rituals and for maintaining the very rhythm of the universe itself.
The god in charge of all this precision was Thoth. Think of him as the divine librarian, the head scientist, the cosmic mathematician. He measured the seasons, he counted the stars, and he kept the entire universe running on schedule. He was the ultimate reckoner of time.
And Thoth's sacred animal, his sort of earthly representative, was the baboon. Now you might be thinking, a baboon? Why a baboon? Well, the Egyptians were meticulous observers of the natural world, and they noticed something very, very specific about this animal.
And here it is. This quote from a writer in the 5th century AD just spells it out. The Egyptians observed that during the equinoxes, those 2 days of the year with equal day and night, the baboon urinates exactly once an hour, 12 times a day. To them, this was no coincidence. It was a sign. The baboon was a living, breathing clock, a guardian of cosmic time.
So this amazing detail, this thing about the baboon, it wasn't just some quirky biological fact they found interesting. This obsession with precision had profound implications for the entire cosmos, and, of course, for every soul, like Jehutimos's, trying to navigate it. You see, this obsession with getting the time just right wasn't just about rituals. It was about maintaining ma'at, the fundamental concept of truth, balance, and cosmic order. The Egyptians believed that correct measurement and order here on Earth actually mirrored and actively upheld the stability of the entire universe.
And this brings it all right back to Jehutimos. For him to have a successful journey through the underworld, the universe itself had to be stable and predictable. So the baboon, as a symbol of Thoth and a marker of precise time, wasn't just a cool decoration on a water clock. It was a guarantor of the cosmic order that made a safe journey to the afterlife even possible.
And these weren't just fleeting ideas. Look at this timeline. These core beliefs, from the nature of the soul to the importance of cosmic order, they developed and were refined over thousands of years. By the time Jehutimos came along, it was an incredibly sophisticated system, and it stayed vital well into the Greco-Roman period. And for one last amazing detail about our priest, his coffin wasn't just meant to lie flat. It was specifically designed with a flat base so it could be stood upright for a crucial funeral ritual, the opening of the mouth ceremony. During this rite, a priest would touch ceremonial tools to the mouth and eyes of the coffin, magically restoring the mummy's ability to see, speak, and eat in the afterlife. The coffin itself was an active participant in his own rebirth.
So, from the embrace of a goddess painted on the inside of a lid to the biological rhythms of a desert baboon, the Egyptians believed that every single detail mattered. It kind of leaves you wondering, if you were planning a journey that had no end, what would be the things you couldn't afford to get wrong?
All right, let's dive right into one of the most fascinating contradictions you'll find in ancient belief. How could the exact same divine being be responsible for unleashing horrible, devastating plagues and also for providing miraculous healing?
It sounds completely impossible, right? A total paradox. But for the ancient Egyptians, the answer wasn't just yes. It was a fundamental part of their worldview, and it all centers on one terrifyingly powerful goddess.
And this is that paradox right here. Sekhmet. On one side, you have the Lady of Terror. She's this fierce lioness goddess who could send pestilence and destruction if you angered her. But then, on the other side of that same coin, she's the Lady of Life, the patron of doctors, whose priests were known as some of the best healers in the entire kingdom. So, to really wrap our heads around how these two opposite ideas could exist in one single deity, we have to first understand who she really was. Her name, that alone tells you almost everything you need to know. It comes from the ancient Egyptian word Sekhem, which just means power. So she wasn't just a powerful being, she was the literal embodiment of raw, untamed force. You can think of her as the scorching, destructive heat of the midday sun. But here's the thing. Her power wasn't just random or chaotic. Nope. In fact, it was tied directly to the single most important principle in the entire Egyptian belief system.
And that concept is Ma'at. For the Egyptians, the entire universe was this delicately balanced system. As long as Ma'at was maintained, you had order, health, and prosperity.
But the moment it got disrupted, that's when you got disaster, famine, and disease. So getting sick wasn't just a physical problem, it was a sign that something was deeply wrong with the cosmic balance. And, according to their myths, humanity itself started messing things up. People stopped obeying divine laws, they started acting with injustice, and, most dangerously of all, they started plotting against the great sun god Ra. They were threatening to shatter that cosmic order.
So Ra needed something to restore his authority. He needed a weapon, an enforcer, powerful enough to punish humanity and bring the universe back into alignment. So what did he do? He unleashed what was called the Eye of Ra, this violent feminine extension of his own divine power. And he gave that fury a physical form, transforming it into the lioness goddess Sekhmet. And this is where we see her raw, uncontrollable power in action. She gets completely lost in this bloodlust and begins a terrifying rampage. She tore through humanity with so much fury that the fields were said to literally run red with blood. She nearly wiped out the entire human race.
But seeing this absolute carnage, Ra, who wasn't a cruel god, started to regret it. He hadn't wanted to destroy humanity, just, teach them a lesson. He had to stop her. And to do that, he came up with a really clever plan.
The key to his whole plan, it comes down to this one number, 7,000. Ra commanded his servants to whip up 7,000 jugs of beer, but this wasn't for some party. It was all part of an elaborate trick. They took all that beer and dyed it deep red with pomegranate juice, then poured it all over the fields where Sekhmet was on her rampage. Blinded by her rage and bloodlust, the goddess looked down and saw exactly what she wanted to see. And the trick worked perfectly. She drank and drank the red beer until she just passed out, falling into a drunken sleep for 3 whole days. When she finally woke up, her bloodlust was totally gone. And this event was so central to their beliefs that they actually celebrated it with annual festivals, where people would drink to excess to honor the taming of the Lady of Terror.
Okay, so that whole wild story of destruction and then pacification, that is the key. That's what finally lets us solve the puzzle of how a goddess of plague could also be a goddess of healing. So let's ask it again. Why? Why in the world would anyone pray for healing to the very same divine force that could unleash a plague on them at any moment? And the answer is all about control. For the ancient Egyptians, it was simple. The power that is great enough to send a plague is the only power great enough to stop it. Healing wasn't about fighting a disease. It was about appeasing the goddess who held it in her hands, and by doing so, restoring Ma'at, that all-important cosmic balance.
And this is exactly why her priests became known as some of Egypt's most skilled physicians. Their whole specialty was understanding and pacifying the goddess. They knew the rituals that could turn her rage into mercy and transform her destructive power into a protective one.
So, in the end, Sekhmet was never really a goddess of chaos. She was a goddess of order. A violent, terrifying, but necessary order. Her rage was a reaction to evil. By sending plagues, she was punishing those who threatened Ma'at. And by healing, she was protecting those who honored it. She was the ultimate enforcer of cosmic balance. So, was she a bringer of plague or a bringer of justice? For the ancient Egyptians, the amazing answer is that she had to be both.
Have you ever looked at the art of ancient Egypt and just thought, it's amazing, it's iconic, but it's also a little weird? Well, what if I told you that what seems strange isn't a limitation at all, but a very specific and powerful language? In this explainer, we're going to decode the hidden logic behind one of the most enduring artistic traditions in human history.
Right, this is the big question, isn't it? We see these figures that are kind of flat, walking sideways but with their shoulders and eyes facing us. You've got people of all different sizes in the same picture, and of course gods with animal heads. It just doesn't look like the world we see every day. So what exactly were they thinking?
For 3,000 years, this style stayed incredibly consistent. Now, it wasn't because they were bad artists or couldn't figure out perspective. No way. It's because they weren't even trying to draw reality as we see it. Their art had a much, much bigger job to do than just capturing a quick snapshot. It was designed to build a perfect world that would last forever.
To get the art, you first have to get their whole worldview. You could say that for the Egyptians, the entire universe ran on a kind of cosmic operating system.
And that system had a name, Ma'at. Honestly, this is the single most important idea to understand.
Ma'at was the perfect, divine order of the universe. It was the opposite of chaos. It was the force that made the sun rise, the Nile flood on schedule, and kept society from falling apart. Upholding Ma'at was everyone's job. And you can see this idea perfectly in their creation story. They believed that in the very beginning, there was nothing but this infinite, chaotic, watery darkness. Then, out of that chaos, the first piece of solid ground rose up, and on that mound, all of creation began. So for them, order literally came directly from chaos. So the number one job of the king, and really of everybody, was to be the chief defender of Ma'at. Their entire world was seen as this constant struggle to protect that little bubble of order from collapsing back into the chaos that was always threatening to break in. So, how do you fight a cosmic battle like that? Well, this is where the art comes in, because for the Egyptians, art wasn't just decoration, it was a tool, it was technology. You could even say it was a form of magic designed to actively maintain Ma'at.
This quote really nails it. For the Egyptians, a picture of something wasn't just a representation. It was a way of making that thing real and permanent. The image didn't just reflect reality, they believed it had the power to create it.
So, get this. When you see a carving on a temple wall of a king making an offering to a god, the Egyptians believed that ritual was now happening forever. The image itself was a kind of cosmic engine, ensuring that vital act was performed for all time, keeping the gods happy and the universe in balance.
And it was the exact same deal with statues. They weren't just stone portraits. They were eternal bodies, just waiting. Through a special ceremony called the opening of the mouth, a statue was ritually brought to life, becoming a vessel that a person's spirit, their ka, could actually live in. It could then receive food, drinks, and prayers for eternity.
Okay, so if your art has the job of creating a perfect, eternal reality, you can't just draw things any which way. You need a system, a clear, powerful visual language, a code. So let's crack this code.
First big rule, they weren't going for realism. Think about it, a realistic picture just captures one fleeting, imperfect moment. The Egyptians were aiming for idealism. They wanted to show the most perfect, the most complete, the absolute best and eternal version of someone or something. And this perfectly explains that famous walk like an Egyptian pose. It's called the composite view, and it's pure genius once you get it. You show the head and legs from the side, because that's their clearest angle. But the eye and the shoulders, you see them best from the front. So you just put them all together to create the most complete, most recognizable version of a person possible. It's not a weird perspective, it's a perfect diagram.
Here's another super simple rule from their code. Size equals importance. That's it. The king, or the person who owned the tomb, is always the biggest figure in the scene. His wife might be a little smaller, and the servants or enemies, they're tiny. It's not bad perspective, it's a visual org chart of power.
They also used symbols as a kind of visual shorthand. It was everywhere. Take the king's crowns. Just by glancing at which crown he was wearing, the tall white one, the wide red one, or both of them combined, you knew instantly if he was ruling the south, the north, or the entire unified kingdom of Egypt.
All right, but what about maybe the strangest part of all for us today? The gods with animal heads. Here we see the goddess Sekhmet. She's got the body of a woman, but the head of a lioness. What's that all about?
Well, once again, it's not meant to be literal. The Egyptians didn't actually think their gods were walking around like this. The animal head was a symbol, a perfect visual metaphor for that god's main power. Sekhmet was a goddess of divine fury and protection. So what better symbol for her ferocious power than the head of a lioness, the most terrifying predator they knew?
So, let's zoom out and put all these pieces of the puzzle together. When you do, a totally new picture of Egyptian art starts to form.
All of a sudden, it's not strange at all. It's a deeply logical, incredibly sophisticated system. Every single choice, every pose, every color, every symbol had a clear and powerful purpose to help create and maintain a perfect, ordered world that would last forever. You just can't separate the art from the temples it was carved on or from the religious beliefs that gave it meaning. It was all one giant, interconnected system. You could call it a form of spiritual technology designed by an entire civilization to be their blueprint for eternity. And that kind of leaves us with one final thought. The Egyptians used every tool they had, art, architecture, writing, to make their ideal vision of the universe permanent. It really makes you wonder, what parts of our own world, our own ideas and values, are we trying to carve in stone and make last forever?